because I work with population juvenile offenders, and this is something that they have to face, and I work with sex offenders, so it's even more of a they'll face even more of an issue because of their label. So so again, thank you to the filmmakers for making a documentary like this and showing it to us, and thank you to Professor Angulo for letting us watch the DVD. So we're going to go ahead and talk to the filmmakers kind of about their experiences, why they chose this topic, because obviously this topic was something in their minds before this all-school day event. So kind of talking about that, what they were thinking before and after making the film. If you could also introduce yourselves, I know you guys have your own names, but
I'm Adina Hill, and Natalie is our film director, so I'm going to let her talk first, and then Veronica and I follow up.
Okay, well, basically there were several things that we wanted to touch on with this film. The first one was that we wanted to highlight some of the personal stories and experiences that were associated with incarceration and reentry. And second of all, we wanted to definitely showcase the barriers that a lot of the people who are coming out of prison, what they face, once they are released, and show that there is definitely a lack of services and support in place for them. And so they basically have to reintegrate on their own by themselves, once they're released. And many of them, as you can see in the film, with the statistics, they're not successful doing this because we know as social workers, they need a lot more than just having a parole agent come to their house once a month. So the third piece that we wanted to talk about was to basically look at what has been done so far and talk about where we went wrong and why there is such a high recidivism rate, and maybe put some topics out there for dialogue as to what needs to be done next. To maybe do some evidence-based programs that we know that will be effective in reintegrating people back into society. Things that will cover employment, housing, vocational skills training, things like that. So that was basically the foundation of our film. We wanted to open the topic up for dialogue about where do we go from here and what needs to be done next.
Absolutely. The story is very personal for both Natalie and I. We have family members who are in prison or have been in prison. So it really touched us on that level. We were in research together, and we just meshed because of that. Our research topics were based around rehabilitation, and we knew that we had that connection. So when Natalie proposed that we do this film, it was absolutely something that I wanted to be a part of. Film definitely changed my life, opened me up for a lot of networking opportunities. As a result, I decided to take my education to the next level and join a Juris Doctor program. So I'll be in Loyola in the fall and working with legal aid full time. So it really changed the scope of the work that I want to do as far as approaching problems from a policy angle. So.
Have anything to do you briefly have any, we're also going to open this up for Q&A, but does anyone have any questions that they want to ask the filmmakers? Don't be shy.
How, you guys did filming obviously in prison. How difficult was it to go into the prison?
We actually didn't. We requested to do it, and because of the budget, they said we don't have the staff to accommodate you. So what we did was we got stock footage from the Department of Corrections, and then we just integrated it into the film. We wanted to go into the prison, but it just wasn't possible.
Yeah, actually, if you go onto the CDCR website, so I wanted to do the media and social work class and actually film some of the juvenile sex offenders that I work with. But they talk about that they're not doing any, prison visits, tours, or filming or anything like that. So that's kind of unfortunate. So we also have two student speakers who kind of share their experiences. But most importantly, it's kind of looking forward and what can we do now, and how can we help this population now? Because we talked about the Senate have passed a bill where over a course of 2 years they're going to be releasing a lot of non-violent offenders, and our system is pretty overwhelmed right now. So with this influx, how are we really going to be able to help realistically? So we have Raimundo, and we also have Barry. So Raimundo,
my name is Ray Zacharias, and I'm one of your MSW fellow classmates. and I want to just read this really quick. My name is Raimundo J. Zacharias, and I would like to share the reasons why I feel I should be allowed an opportunity to take part in the University of Southern California's Master's Social Work Program. I come from a background of drugs, gangs, and prison, and yet here I am applying to your program with experiences and qualifications parallel to what you seek in a well-rounded social worker. At age 39, I've reinvented and redefined who and what I am. Since restarting my schooling, I have accomplished what some have said could never be done. Change. Throughout this essay, I will demonstrate that with my commitment and education and life can change. And basically what it is that's the barrier. When I was released from incarceration, I'd never worked before. I had no education to speak of. I had an addiction, multiple addictions, and upon release, I had no real skills. So what I needed to do was to get educated and to network and to address my drug problem. 85% of those that are incarcerated have a drug-related problem. I did parole orientation for 3 years. I was community resource provider, and I worked for the local community college. And what we've come to find is that 85% have a drug problem. If that's not addressed in prison, it's going to be addressed after prison. So wherever they go, it goes. And that's number one. The other one is housing. In San Bernardino County, and these are some of the barriers, the stigmatism. For those that come out and don't have family and don't have an income, do stuff called like sober livings or these houses that people rent out rooms. Well, the only ones that are affordable are like sober livings. In San Bernardino City, they have shut them down. They're not allowing them anymore because people are taking advantage of those that are of my population. They can't afford to rent a room in a regular house, so there's like 15 of us in one room. And it's legal, because once you have your house, you can do with it however you want. So the county has come in and they've shut them down. But San Bernardino is really super conservative, so that's another one, the stigmatism. The other one is education. I have a cousin that just recently got arrested for in his involvement in $800,000 drugs, money and stuff. He cannot read or write. He's maybe 35. So whatever they present him, he can't read. So we need education. Another one is jobs. What I've found to have worked with the population that I've worked with, because I have worked in drug court with as a drug counselor, so I would always encourage my clients to go to school. And I rode the same bus that they rode. I went to the same school, and one day I'm in a tie, the next day I'm a student worker as a janitor. So they saw me in two different lights, but I stayed the same all the way through. And I showed by demonstration of example that if you're committed, things will happen. In order to come to USC, I was really honest that I'd been in prison, and I didn't get into details and all that, but I did state that I have a commitment to the community. Here I have my portfolio. I'll pass it around. Then you take a look at what I've done. I got involved with one of the ladies up front that was speaking. They have a civil rights group called All of Us or None, and it's it's advocates on behalf of previously incarcerated individuals. So we put on this job fair in San Bernardino, and what the purpose was is that society and the community is saying, hey, you know what? No, these guys and gals just don't want to work. They're lazy. They want to live off the system. They like going to jail. We had 3,000 people show up at 5 o'clock in the morning. We drug tested 1,000 people. We were able only to get maybe 5 companies from the community that were willing to be felony friendly. And we understand that as a community, we don't, and I'm coming from that population, I don't want my whole company full of felons. No offense, I'm one of them, but one will make a difference. That's one person and one family that will have a job. We got about 30 or 40 people jobs that day, so those 30 or 40 families had something to look forward to. But what we saw is that most of the community wasn't willing to get behind us. And then in the paper, it was portrayed that still can't get them jobs. Not that 3,000 people showed up at 5 in the morning that are lazy, were dressed in suits, had their resumes, and were willing to drug test, but that we couldn't get them jobs. And what it is, it really needs to be a collaborative effort. And if we can get at least one company to hire one person, that's one less person that's going to go back to prison. A big part of what's going on is, there's a lot of drug addiction, a lot of lack of education, lack of proper housing. in California, in this state, we have people that are like 15 people legally living in one room. I currently manage a sober living now, and that's kind of how I got here. And we have one person to the room, and I rent a room because that's all I can afford, and it works. We work together, we encourage each other, and I've got different people there. But one of the key things that has really changed my life, aside from rehabilitation and all the support, has been education. When I got accepted to SC, I turned down a job at ITT for $50,000 a year being a college recruiter. I turned down a job for the local community college that I was working at as a student worker for about $40,000 a year in order to come here. And it all was made possible through this. I've worked, what's not in here is recently I went to the Chino prison and I spoke over there with other inmates to encourage them to share my story. The weekend before that I was at juvenile hall sharing with the students, or with the juvenile offenders, that it can be done. And I do a lot of stuff, but you have to be willing to, I had to learn how to circumvent all the barriers. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Barry?
My name is Barry Hurst. I'm also a fellow student here at USC. And it just happens by coincidence that Ray and I work together in the same internship. So we didn't know we were going to both be here today, and we do work with ex-offenders. But similar story to Ray, I've been to jail. I've multiple times. I grew up in a depressed neighborhood. That corner where everybody sold drugs, that was the corner that I lived on. So if there was trouble in the neighborhood, as a young, headstrong youth, I would find it for sure. Got arrested multiple times, a little different than Ray. I did most of my stuff as a juvenile. Spent 9 months in jail as a juvenile. Didn't learn anything in jail except for how to fight, pretty much. I did complete a drug program in jail, but it was just kind of the thing where you just show up, you didn't really do anything. But along the way, in my journey through the criminal justice system, I encountered a social worker when I was a young kid, and they planted the seeds in my life. It took many years for those seeds to grow. So many years later, after getting out of the system, I figured out how to stay out of trouble, but still doing drugs, and dual diagnosis. I suffered from depression also. So those sorts of, and then a family member stepped in many years later, and he said, "Come live with me." And he showed me how to enroll in school. I didn't have a high school diploma. When I got out of jail, I didn't have anything, and that's been a major barrier along the way. Ray talked a lot about the barriers. I think education is a major barrier. But I'm here today at USC, so who would have thought? We work with ex-offenders every day. Employment is a huge issue for us. We're a small grassroots nonprofit organization. It's called Communities in Schools. And some of you have heard it. They actually had 2 guys on the film from there, and so Ray and I were stuck giving invisible high fives. So that was cool to see. They're cutting edge, so-called wraparound services. They would call it integrated services or comprehensive services, not wraparound services. So employment is a huge barrier for us there. And it's really hard with limited budget, but we do everything we can to get them jobs. They talked about Homeway Industries and Father Greg Will. A job does stop a bullet, stops people from going back to jail. I truly believe that. I think we need training as one of the barriers, lack of training, lack of education. I think they should be doing more training in the prisons. Some of the things that I've encountered along my way doing this work, this is a passion of mine. Reentry, I've written just about all my papers on it. Plan on going on for the PhD, doing research in reentry. We encounter mental health issues 70% of the time, it said, I think, or the speaker said today. We encounter it probably 90% of the time. Just basic health issues, drug and alcohol issues, anger management, childcare, housing, and the actual trauma of being in jail, and like me, learning how to fight. I came out traumatized. They wouldn't let me go back to my normal high school, even though I had a B average. I was a troublemaker, but I was good at school, but they wouldn't let me go back there, so that was a whole nother issue. And also, one thing about barriers is when you get out of jail, they return you into the same environment that you got in trouble in the first place. So that's always interesting to me. If you want to go somewhere else, especially as an adult, you can't. You're on parole. You have to go back from where you started. What can we do as social workers? I think there should be, for a best practice, and we've been doing research on this with community schools, one in-house program. All services under one roof. There's too many gaps, too many fragments. Go here for a job, go here for training, go here for anger management, go here for family counseling, everything under one roof. One-stop shop, if you call it. Our boss would call it comprehensive integrated services. I haven't come up with a better name, so that's what I'm going to call it. I think the entire family should be involved in the services. A lot of what Ray and I do, we start with the individual, kind of get tunnel vision on them, hook them into the program, and then expand to the family, community resources, and all the way up the food chain to the policy. And let's face it, it's not really popular to advocate for criminals. It doesn't really get votes. You're not going to see Arnold up there advocating for criminals as we see him. They're actually the complete opposite. But as social workers, we can change that. Go to lobby days, write your lobbies. I wrote Arnold the letter before, and the secretary wrote me back. So. He didn't say much, but at least I got Thank you for your concern. And I had people along the way tell me, don't do that. You're going to get arrested again or whatever. But CIS, where we work at, is one of the premier programs. Like I said earlier, it's been copied all over the whole country. We said it include the whole family. I think part of the wraparound services or integrated services should be expungement. Teach them how to expunge records. That is possible, even for felons. And like they talked about in the meeting today, on the policy level, that law needs to be changed where felons can get work. And we work with family. There is felony-friendly, as Ray calls them, companies out there. It's just not easy to find. And all these services take a tremendous amount of our time. Each case is like a full-time job, and I have 14 cases right now. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a lot when you try to get on with the education, the training, drugs, alcohol, mental health, all that. Also, one of the best practices, I believe we should take some of the money away from the law enforcement and force their hand, if you will, on putting them on the prevention side and intervention side instead of the suppression side. But the Prison Guard Union, as some of you may know, some of you not know, is one of the most powerful unions in California, if not the most powerful. So that's going to be a difficult task for us to take on as social workers. And one thing as social workers, we always think the notion of recovery, everybody can recover no matter what they've been through. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Barry. Unfortunately, Professor Crispin can't meet with us, but so we're going to go ahead and open it up for question and answer. So I'm sure I saw a lot of your heads nodding as our speakers and our filmmakers were talking. So this is kind of your chance to really, get an inside look into the barriers and how we can, combat this. And as frustrating as it is, and as frustrating as the system is, and we all want to burn it down and start over. We have to work with what we have. And I know it gets really depressing, because I work with the juveniles, and we have AB 1053 that just passed, and it's supposed to be released 90 to 120 days before their pro-board hearing, their ACT, and and they come out and they're going to be facing a lot of barriers. They're young, they can't find jobs because of the labels, or they get a certificate in their facility. For graduating high school, but a lot of them can't read, a lot of them can't write, and it's going to be really difficult for them. So we're going to go ahead and open it up. If you have any questions, please speak loudly so everyone can hear. Any questions?
Just a comment, maybe to start. When you watch something like this, it's infuriating in some ways because, okay, people are committing crimes and it's crime enough, but then you have towering crimes that are being committed and it's legit. I mean, in some of this war or the oppression of black people in different forms that takes, and Latino people, and it's just completely legit. And there's criminals who are running society, frankly, if you really want to get down to it. Look at Haiti. I mean, the U.S. took control of the airport, blocked medicine, food, water, personnel. And people don't know this. They haven't really put it together yet, but they prevented people from being saved. And it's like, my God, it's a towering crime. And then you have these young men up here, and here are the criminals in our society, you know what I mean? It's just like infuriating beyond belief. But basically, here's my question. And if people want to look into that, they really should. I mean, because this is unfolding as we speak. 20,000 people are dying every day in Haiti off this earthquake. And it's just like incredible, you know? But anyway, here's my question. And it has to do with, no, it's, I mean, it's this, is that, I mean, it's just sort of a question, because you guys were able to dig into this issue. And we all know there's 2.3 million people in prison. More in land of the free, home of the brave. You know, more people in prison than any place on the planet Earth. More women in prison, 200,000 women in prison. And so there's a certain theme in here about its profit. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and I don't necessarily agree with that being it's an aspect of things. And I'm just going to pose this, but to me it has to do principally with, especially like the post-60s period, if you will. In other words, you know, that was a period where like there was a lot of upheaval and a lot of, you know, change went on in society. And frankly, the government and the system, as you put it, was threatened by that. And for 30 years, you know, you've had just a building of these prisons, just unbelievable, the explosion and expansion of the prison population around the country and also especially in California. And so I've been, you know, from my investigations into this, it's mainly, principally, and this is not what I hear, you know, from most, you know, themes of it, is that it's social control. It's not profit, actually, that's driving this, although it's an aspect and they have some slave labor and stuff like that. But there's an element of social control, of actually like looking at those sections of the populations that are potentially unruly or could be catalytic for big change, and to put those people in jail by the hundreds of thousands. And that's what's actually going on here, and that, you know, I know these are issues of how to get inside, you know, how to deal with, but I mean, even the way you put it, or somebody said, it's like, you know, you'd be arrested, right, for sending a letter. You know, what does that tell you? It's actually probably not too far off. Send a letter to him, and by the way, he didn't say anything to you. The secretary did. It's not like he didn't say much. He didn't say shit. No, but I mean, no, I'm just saying, it's not that. That was sort of my question, is wrestling with that a little bit. Is this social control? You know, is this, and in a really, and that, you know, last comment, go down to Watts and just look at it. Housing authority, police, you know, LAPD, sheriff's department. All of a sudden now the highway patrol is running around Locke High School. How did they get there? It's pretty hard, you know, and it's just layers upon layers and layers. By the time you're 15, you're just jacketed by this system. You got a jacket on you that you're a criminal. You're 15. You've just been walking to and from school. So, you know what I mean? What is that? And you know, I'm just, you know, again, I think the profit is a profit, but I think this question of social control, we got to get that this is what's actually principally what's going on here. And if we're going to change this, you know, that thing around anyway, I'm sorry. I mean, that last thing, you know, that last thing about like that was very heavy when he came out before Proposition 66. That was going to be, whatever, defeated, if you will, or it was going to be overthrown, the three strikes. And then he came out, and they did this whole public opinion barrage, right? And you know what, I talked to these brothers over at Fame, and they, like, these guys, I talked to a lot of people in the neighborhood off of that. And these guys were saying to me, fuck it. We voted, it was the only time we voted, and then just like, forget it, I ain't doing this again. And it was sort of like not the right response, very demoralizing in a certain sense and having its intended effect on them, you know what I mean? But it was very heavy. It was just like, fuck, you know, screw it, I'm not going to vote, I'm out of it. Rather than kind of get political or however they thought they could try and change things, you know? But I remember that very distinctly because people just sort of like, you know, look, you can't do nothing. And in a way you can't. I mean, within the system, I think that is the reality. You're not going to be able to fundamentally change this until this system is swept away and something much better is put into place. Something much more radical and fundamental needs to be like happen here. I mean, look, you know, like you said, I mean, it is by far the largest, you know, the prison guard thing, the union.
Yeah, the
My
union.
God, how powerful this thing is, you know. So, yeah, that's my
Thank
comment.
you.
I was curious because I know we talk a lot, when it comes to this issue about jobs and placement and transitioning, but we saw a lot of young individuals in prison who get out of prison, get out of jail. What about the ones that serve their nice long sentences and are 40, 50 when they get out? Like, you know what I'm saying? Because I see that, and they're on the streets, and they're homeless, they're drug addicts, and they're back in a drug treatment facility trying to collect Social Security to live in poverty for the remainder of their life. Like, I don't know what percentage of that population that, I don't know if you guys have encountered any of that, like what percentage of that population is reflected in the statistics of people who get tossed back out the system, and how do you give a 55-year-old, second striker fresh out of the camp?
I think
hope,
that's a whole other issue, but I think that percentage of the people that age that are being released is really small. But I think what I've seen with the statistics is that the majority of the people are male. They're either black or Latino, and they're the working age. They're between, I'd say I think it was 18 and 35, and they're being incarcerated and being released. So I think that's the larger percentage. And those are the people that we really need to worry about, because when they do come out, they're relatively young, and they still have their whole life to live. They need to support their family, themselves, and they're liable to commit another crime right away if there's nothing in place for them once they come out.
Yeah, I guess we could say the same thing for the percentage of the population that comes out, and they're that small percentage that, because they're old now, they're in the process of being fully thrown away. Because that is somebody's daddy and somebody's son and stuff like that,
I might be able to shed a little light. Keep in mind that when I say 85% or 80% are drug-related crimes, that means if I did a robbery, if I did a burglary, 9 times out of 10, it's drug-related. So if we can introduce some drug rehabilitation, and the reason I point that out is because my grant sponsor is going to be 81 years old and still working. He spent 31 years in prison, in and out. Came out, had not a lick of skill, not life skill, not job skill, most definitely not education. And he went through rehabilitation. He went into a drug treatment. He's still working. Now, he's been drug counseling, and it's rumored that he's one of the best of the best. He's trained me, and if he was he would get worst case scenarios. If this guy can't work with you, nobody can. And he's done, phenomenal. So there is hope. But they still need to be trained to some degree. And a lot of the population, because I lived in downtown San Bernardino, and I'm gonna tell you, I saw homeless vets that were drug addicted. I watched a 70-some-year-old gentleman who was a Vietnam vet stab another young man who was a young man over a crack deal, and was being denied his services, as a vet. He was living in the little, empty lot. So if we can address that, and then we can address some job skills, and then try and treat them. Keep in mind, each and every one of these people has a story. It's not a cookie cutter. It's not a cookie cutter. Just like we work with clients, each person has a story. And as the last case part of the whole thing, it's rehabilitation, education, job, legislation. I'm going to do COPA, and part of what I mentioned, because I already knew they have nothing. Because like I said, I'm going to have an MSW, and I can't work at McDonald's because I have a felony. Makes no sense. I'm paying $66,000 a year. What? Job? Assign me a room now.
But I want to make one more comment on her thing. We have a person that works with us too at CIS. He was in jail for 31 years, and he'll talk sometimes about this population. And on the exact opposite of what Jay's saying, they'll just commit another crime in jail, stab someone so they don't have to get out, unfortunately. Or they just won't report to parole, to go straight back. And one thing, not too many people, this population isn't too popular, and who else is going to take on this population but social workers, especially your population you're talking about.
And I've seen education break that cycle. I've seen a guy on parole and probation get his associates in science. He can even spell associate. And, you know, and I'm not making fun, I'm just stating the fact. The education is really low. And then bring his nephew out of the gang involvement neighborhood because you become a role model now. And took him to school with them. Maybe it saved his life. I don't, you know. You were saying?
Yeah, I was thinking one of the students made a statement, in your journey you get tired. And I thought I'm going to grab that, I'm going to use that in my next writing program. I work with juvenile offenders in Norwalk and in Chino, you know, in a volunteer writing program for the last 6 years that I started at Pittsburgh College. And I'm fortunate enough to have Esther work with me occasionally. Now, I mean, we're working together actually on a project, and I will tell you this. Someone said, one of the speakers, that you know, you start with one. And I would say over the last 6 years, I've worked with about 70 boys, from 14 or so, 14 and a half to about 22. So I've watched them grow up, in a sense, that 14-year-old and so forth. And I realized that, you know, the whole system's screwed up on so many facets, as you indicated, that layer, like that onion. And so the only thing you can do is what I as an individual do, is decide I want to help. I want to make a change. And if you can, with that attitude, go into your neighborhood where you can break that stigma, that punitive stigma that, you know, we've got, you know, we just want to break them all down and let the community know what's out there, you know, and how you can change the kids, change those young people who are going to get out anyway. So why not give them the tools that they need, you know? And so my program is getting them to write about what is difficult to talk about and maybe articulate to their counselors and so forth. And writing is really, really quite cathartic. And I thought about one boy who, in my project, when they're paroled and after they're off parole, I follow them, you know, and there's one boy that I followed all the way to Sacramento. He started managing a Quiznos, and he's serving a, you know, lunch crowd one day. And he said, I looked in the eyes of one woman there, and I just knew her. And he said, excuse me, are you Arlene Edwards? Who's his mom? He hadn't seen her since he was 12 and he's now 24 years old. Because he's been in and out, in and out, in and out. So now I'm trying to get him to write that story, write it. You know, maybe it will inspire someone. And even though I think sometimes I wish my project was bigger where I could reach more of them, but I know I'm helping them. And I call it Forgotten Souls Redeemed. I call it Forgotten Souls because I think that the boys and the young men especially, and adults, but especially the young men who need us a chance, they are forgotten. But my husband added the word redeemed, and he said, because you're there now, you know. And toward that end, I'm able to get academics in and so forth, and other people to show them that they're worth more than their yesterday, you know, that they can do something tomorrow. And, you know, social work to me is, it's like being a nurse. I mean, it's the most compassionate field, and you almost can't teach compassion. It's something that almost has to be innate. And you know who can work with you and who won't, and you know who cares and who doesn't. And if you can just find 100 like yourself and take that little 100, I mean, you really can make a difference. It's horrible, and it's just gonna, all you're doing is creating people who become the smaller or the fringe of society, or what do they call them in India?
Untouchables.
The untouchables. You're calling them the untouchables, you know, and they're untouchable because of what we did to them. Parents, relatives, the boys I work with were all abused, you know, they're sex offenders, juvenile, you know, so to break it, oh my God, it just takes a whole room of compassionate people like you guys and students who get out there, get your training, and just look beyond the label and look at the person as an individual with a soul and a heart and potential. And I tell them, oh, you're worth something. You know, and just to know their name means a lot. Because if you name it, you know, the guards don't even know their names usually. If I ask for Norman, who is that? You know, they know the last name or the number. And to say, I don't know, that's your identity, your name. Anyway.
Thank you.
No.
I was going to say, keep in mind that this is something that's not a short-term solution. We have one of my new clients. He's like a 6 to 8 year investment that they made in this young man. He was a tagger, pretty much bound for the gang and all that comes with it, which will be jails, institutions, eventually death. But they stayed committed to this young man, and I just recently helped him apply to USC. He's interning into confidentiality at a large, well-known studio under a writer who just received the Golden Globe. So that's his mentor, but people had to take time and invest in this kid for 6 years. And a lot of the families and the populations, as a result of either the parent being incarcerated or outside by himself, they're missing family members. So if you guys can volunteer, you guys can be big brothers. You know, I have done a lot of stuff that they said I couldn't do, like work with juveniles, you know, and I have there's no crimes against children and anything like that. However, because I have a felony, I'm not supposed to. I volunteered with my church. I've went in there and give gift baskets, anything to let this population know that we still care. I mean, because we're agents of change, and in order to do that, we need to be committed to something. I'm like super on fire. If you look at the thing, I'm all up in the community, and I just came out here now, and I'm trying to do the same thing. But yeah, thank you.
Really quickly, I know there's still some questions, but Professor Prisman is here, and we kind of really talked about the male population, young men, and Nicole had brought up the older, but we also have, incarcerated women. So Professor Prisman is going to kind of speak on his experiences working with them and their reentry. So
I apologize for being late. I had another faculty appointment that I had to take care of that went on for way too long. So I apologize. But yeah, so I'm working currently at the LA County Women's Jail, testing some interventions. So there's a few different issues that women face. Particularly the women I work with also have severe mental illness, so that's another set of issues. But the larger issue they face is the involvement of DSFS, because a lot of them either were receiving services through DSFS or have their own children and now are involved with DCFS. So there's a lot of additional parameters that they have to then face when they're either in jail, when they're released from jail, if they're on probation, if they're on parole. So one of those issues is obviously the tension we as social workers have to face, both who we work for and trying to help the women. So, and by that I mean the tension of are we there to help further police them, or are we there to help them regain some control that maybe they don't have? Because unfortunately, it's probation and parole are powerful tools to use over people, and then furthermore, when you then involve DCFS, when you're trying to enforce change. One of the things we should know are that there's almost no proven rehabilitation interventions that work. So a lot of people are sharing success stories, and those are great. But we, as social workers who are getting a training, both in practice and also in research, so I know a lot of you don't like those research classes, but we need to begin to document programs that work, because there are no proven rehabilitation. So when it comes time to cut budgets, as we heard today, it's very easy to cut rehabilitation because nothing's been proven to work. So nobody's going to fund services that are nice stories, but no results. So that's one thing. So involving all our work. But back to the women, the intervention I specifically focus on is another area that I've heard in coming in late, is this idea of social skills and community involvement. The reality is, for a lot of people in prison, especially women, and especially women with severe mental illness, is that they don't have those skills. We take for granted that the community is a warm and nurturing place, and that just getting them to the community is good. Unfortunately, the reality is that's usually what leads to their arrest, that they're in a community that more often than not, some of those supports are negative. And gangs, family members who might be engaged in activities that, be better than, so not to be involved in. So thinking about places where we can not only strengthen the women who are in jail, but give them the skills to also then go back and strengthen their environment. So that's one of the unique things I think about social work versus some of the other helping professions, is that we work in that social environment. That's the name of social work. So helping to strengthen that social environment. So for women, again, that's a particular need, because when they come out, they're assumed to not have, again, with this DCFS involvement, they're assumed by virtue of being in jail that they're not going to be good mothers, right? That they're the fact of having gone to jail makes them bad parents. So helping them feel comfortable enough to advocate for themselves, helping them feel comfortable enough to fight for the rights of their children, and to also ensure that the environment they're bringing their children home is an environment that won't lead to them being rearrested. So it's a hard task that I'm glad so many people are interested in staying for yet more talking. So that's encouraging. But so in a nutshell, if I could just remind you that holding on to those research courses you have to take, including them in your thoughts. I know you had mentioned before advocacy and legislation, but again, if we don't have results, what are we legislating for? So keeping that in mind, keeping also in mind that the special needs of women and children, and one of the most powerful places social work has been able to impact is with families. So thinking about that as we engage the prison system, and not just viewing this as what's happening to young men, but really viewing this as what's happening to families, and making that connection. So when I saw him,
I was just going to ask, do you think that maybe there is no rehab that can work? Maybe it is just early intervention that could work? Is there any way to measure that or try to implement?
I think that until we measure it, we don't know. I mean, I could tell you my intervention actually focuses on early intervention, so that I start groups in the jail, peer-run groups in the jail. And the idea is that those will then carry out when they're released from jail. But I don't know, until we have effective measures, we don't know. And the literature is so scarce on any of this. And again, this is, as big as the problem is in California, it's fairly new problem. I mean, we're not talking like, 20 years. I mean, the incarceration rates in the last decade have almost doubled, or tripled even. So, this is a new problem that we have to account for.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Latia Jacobs, and this actually is my second time reviewing the film. I've seen it last year. And first wanted to thank you for being able to introduce a film that has a lot of influence on communities where people may not be knowledgeable about the issues. However, as a person who has been affected on both sides of the situation, it at times can become like I have to constantly remind myself that there is hope for rehabilitation. Currently I have a close cousin who is trying to petition for parole after being incarcerated for 15 years. On the other side, I do have, I am currently going through the process of going to trial for my nephew's murder. So part of it's like, you're like, okay, you want these people to be rehabilitated, but then you also keep in mind that, there are these people who can access these things where they took a 16-year-old who will never be able to graduate from high school, let alone participate in, high school activities. So with that being said, these are some of the issues that I feel like socially come up in terms of discussion regarding implementing new programs or interventions. And so with that being said, what are some options or ideas that we as, current upcoming advocates and social workers can kind of do in order to keep discussion, keep discussion and kind of keep hope in those people or individuals who feel like there's no other alternatives other than just keeping them there, not providing them with other opportunities. What are some ideas or creative ways to kind of keep that discussion alive?
I would say start with whatever ideas you have and try them. I mean, there are no answers until we start trying and seeing what works. One of the women speakers there for the group homes, I can't believe I'm forgetting the Susan. No, I was thinking of her agency. So I've worked with her agency. I can't remember it now. But I mean, she bought a house and just started something. And who knows? I mean, I think us as social workers, we tend to rely very much on this idea we're going to get our MSW, graduate, and work for an agency. We don't think of that social entrepreneurship of let's start our own agency, let's start our own way of doing it. Again, this is a new problem. I mean, this is a recent, the growth of the prison population is huge. And so, there are lots of opportunities to think of new ways of doing it.
Oh, I'm already there. But
also to add to that, you mentioned that that duality of having this one opinion. I think that always having an open forum so that everyone feels that their opinions are respected is definitely a way to usher in new thought about how to institute some of these things and actually implement programs that work that will meet the needs of a victim and also meet the needs of the convicted offender. So when you open that dialogue, I think just as a continued community conversation, you get to see both sides of that, and so you in a sense can represent everyone at the table when you are thinking of new programs and anything innovative from there.
Thank you. I wanted to add to that as well. I think part of it is just about staying informed. When things come up in the community, sometimes there are programs or activities that happen that we don't always hear about because, like was mentioned up here, advocating for people who have been in prison is not really a popular thing. So I think to keep yourself informed and keep your ear open to what may be going on around you, you may be surprised as to what you may find. I know a couple months ago in October, the School of Social Work put on a symposium with the federal district court judges who all came together, and they're looking at starting a program or at least putting their heads together to come up with some ideas about what needs to be done about reentry. So I think it's just such a huge issue that there's not really much we can do. That would be I don't know, on a large scale, but I think on an individual level, like it was also mentioned, volunteer, do what you can do, but also keep your ears open as to what may be going on. Because I think right now with the economic climate in California, people are really starting to look at the prison system and thinking about, okay, we wasted all this money, now what can we do differently? So maybe in the future there may be some programs and stuff where they may be asking for volunteers and people with social work degrees to come and get involved and at least lend their ideas to what needs to be done next.
Natalie's like my best friend ever, but I disagree with her about the taking that whole defeatist attitude about legislation and policy. Like if you want to make a change, you actually have to go out there and do it. Even if it's just putting a bug in somebody's ear or speaking out when you can. I think sometimes we take the back road, like, oh well, no one's gonna listen to me, because the path isn't so easily paved for us. But going out and being that voice wherever you can, even if you're sharing in a small circle, if it's just a group meeting where you guys meet at the library, discuss whatever needs to take place to get the thought, to keep it rolling. Create a community forum online. They have Prison Talk. They have a couple of different websites where you can have that forum for open discussion. But I don't want us to just feel like, okay, it's this huge problem that's developed for 20 years. We have no way of, navigating this system. But if we know that it's, like the gentleman behind me was saying, that it's something that's socially motivated or racially charged, then we need to address it from that angle. If that's the philosophy that we think is driving it, then go ahead and attack that. Don't feel discouraged because it's, this huge bureaucracy that keeps controlling us. Don't let that hinder you from pushing forward. If it takes us, to petition or lobby or whatever we need to do. That's my thoughts.
I had a real quick question. What population do you want to work with?
Particularly, I like working with juveniles. I actually got my undergrad degree in criminal justice with a focus on juvenile family services, and just so happen all these other events transcend after the degree.
Keep in mind all the barriers that we've shared. One of the things I want to do is, my end goal is to get my PhD and do research, etc. But I want to have a multi-service community center. But I want to employ individuals that specialize, like gang intervention, that have felonies. But then I want to put them in school so that they don't just work for me and are cheap labor. I want to educate them and give them an opportunity, like they said, to build something on their resume. So now they can go to the next job site and say, you know what, I got certified as a case manager or a drug counselor or whatever, and have an experience, at a reputable community center. Something like, find something that you want to do it.
Oh,
do it.
It's not so much about personally what I want to do, because I feel like I'm very active. I have these ideas, and I've already put on an event, a community awareness event that had well over 200 participants, and it was all volunteer. And so I feel like I've done it, but I feel like there are so many people who aren't in support of programs or things, or who don't have the same thought process as we do in this room regarding the situation. So part of the question was, well, how do you continue to provide education to these people, as well as how do you continue to convey the importance of the issue, of addressing the issue outside of just these forums? Because for the most part, I would assume that we may share in this room kind of the same opinion around the situation. So how do we can kind of convey the message that's portrayed in this room to those who aren't in support of it?
I think two things that I always come back to when people think that it doesn't affect them, it may not directly affect them, but to always tell people, well, look, if you're a taxpayer and you live with other people in your community, there are going to be people that are going to be released back to your community that, hey, if they can't find a job, they may be robbing you, or things like that. And it's like, if you're a taxpayer, this is where your money is going. As one of the women in the film said, it's eating up our resources in California. So a lot of our money is being put into incarcerating people and not into prevention and education. So to remind them of that, I think is an important issue, because I don't think people realize how expensive it is to just throw people in jail. It's not, the tough on crime thing, it's not going to work. You can't just keep doing that over and over again. It's eventually going to come back around, and it's going to be coming out of your pocket. So.
I just want to say one thing too. It sounds like you want to keep the all school days all good, reentry, all that, but then when we leave here today, what's going to happen? Basically what you're saying. I'd say challenge your instructors, challenge them in class. I do all the time. I don't know about you, my instructors like to talk. They'll tell you your opinion. You might have to ask it a few different ways. Whatever the subject is, my thing's gangs and reintegration, one of them. I try to work it in with every discussion. It could be uncomfortable sometimes, but also not directed at you, but kind of along those lines. You could have the best program, all the money in the world, the best intervention, but it's all about that relationship. That's where it starts, ground level, one-on-one.
We're going to go ahead and take one more question and kind of figure out.
Yeah.
As I was sitting here, listening to everything, I started to think about everyone in this room says, oh, I really want to help. I'm so motivated to help. But there's such a great disconnect between thinking and doing. A lot of times, no matter how small, I'm sitting here thinking, wow, what can I really do in my community? Even if it's 2 or 3 kids, 2 or 3, whoever. And I started thinking, everyone in this room we're obviously here because we're interested and we want to help and we want to find ways to help. But at the same time, we don't do it. We're so caught up with our own personal lives and what's going on and improving for ourselves and, other people in our family that we forget that it's not just about you. No matter how much you improve yourself, if you stay within a community that has so many barriers and so many things going on, your change doesn't really matter. It doesn't make a great, change for everyone else. So I just was sitting here thinking that, and I wanted to express that and say that everyone in here, if we really just got together and say, wow, let's go put on a community program. I don't care if we go pull 10 kids from down the street because a block down the way, there's some, drug selling and dealing and all this other stuff. But yet here we are at USC, the greatest school ever. Well, in my opinion. I was just sitting here thinking, I feel that as students and, all the stuff that we do, yes, I know we're busy, but we can do so much more than what we really just say that we want to do. We don't put it into action. And I think that's the issue.
Give us time. That's all I have to say. Give us time. We're still students. Give us time.
I just wanted to comment that, we are all individuals. We're all in the school of social work. And you're right, let's not keep it within these walls, but let's definitely, go out and talk to, our family members and, our loved ones who kind of, because I know when I tell people that I work with juvenile sex offenders, they're kind of like, what, why? And when you do talk to them, you kind of open their mind to a different side. And, it's really interesting because when people either read articles or watch TV and they talk about sex offenders, they're always like, hey, Esther, I was watching this thing and it reminded me of you. Really, I don't, it's not because you think I'm a sex offender, but because I work with them. But I think that's what it is, because now, their mind is open, to this topic and to this subject. So definitely, exactly, we just were in Bovard, we learned about all this stuff, we got all this information. Now we're in here, we got a little bit more, we're dialoguing. But now it's, instead of just talking, amongst ourselves, it's let's take it out there. Right. Whether it's all of us, we sign some petition that says, we're going to combat this. Or, we go ahead and, do some mentorship with a couple people. I mean, think about it. If you look around this room when it was full, but if we all, mentor 2 or 3, I mean, that's a lot of people, and just kind of spreading that around. So, let's take it one step further. Let's go out here. When we go out, use the bathroom, but go talk to someone. But yeah, let's keep the momentum going. Don't just let it end here, because we're all advocates. That's why we're in social work. So advocate the verb. Let's do something. Let's not just talk about it in class, but let's actually do stuff. So I want to, once again, thank you guys all for, coming and, watching the documentary and listening to our speakers. And of course, thank you to our filmmakers for coming here. Professor. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this, and hopefully they kind of stay. If you guys have any comments or questions that you didn't address, you can go ahead and talk to them. And I think there's some dessert as well right outside. So
Yeah.